Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video, we're going to be discussing best practices for improving mobility of thoracic rotation. If you want more information on thoracic extension, go back and watch the previous video. Now, before we get into the specific mobility exercises, I want to make sure we cover very briefly 3 important tips for maximizing success with improving the mobility, but also creating long-lasting gains after you do said exercises. And we covered these in much more detail in the last video, but we'll briefly gloss over them here. And those are, number 1, if we're doing any kind of manipulation in the chiro world, they would say adjustment, high velocity, low amplitude thrust, right? Any manual mobilizations where we're trying to mobilize the spine, or just simple stretches, simple mobility exercises, we always want to make sure we give a reinforcing exercise, particularly one that's more functional, maybe against resistance, to better keep those gains long term. Number 2, we want to minimize compensations by the lumbar spine. So if we're doing thoracic rotation, we want to minimize lumbar rotation. And we'll talk about some tips and ways that you can do that. And number 3, we want to make sure that we are also mobilizing the ribs, not just the spinal segments themselves. And the best way that we can do that is with our breathing. And as we go through the videos, we will see how we incorporate that into each of these exercises. So without further ado, let's start with the simple self-mobilizations. And my favorite for these, for pretty much anybody, is the open book exercise. And there's 2 variations. We're going to cover those right now. Take a look. Now, the first couple of exercises I'm going to be showing you to improve thoracic rotation mobility are both open book exercises. Number 1 is going to be in Sidelying, and we'll see number 2 in half kneeling in just a couple minutes. Now, before we get going too far, a few pieces of terminology that you won't find anywhere on the internet. I just use these to communicate better with patients. So right here, this I would call my closed book position. The top hand, no matter which side I'm doing, this is my front cover. The bottom hand is my back cover. And generally speaking, we are going to be rotating by moving the front cover away from the back cover. Now, open books, not that simple, because if I just do this like this, I'm prone to get a lot more lumbar rotation compensation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a pillow, a bolster, foam roll, or something, and I'm going to place my top knee on that. And I'm not just going to rest it there. I'm going to gently, not as hard as I can, drive this into the floor as I perform the movement, okay? So here's my closed book position. I'm going to open up, opening, making sure that I don't go so far that my knee is forced to come off this object. I want to keep that there, right? And then when I get to my end range, either when this wants to come off or I just can't rotate any further, I'm going to inhale through my nose, not all the way, maybe like 40-50%. And then I'm going to exhale through pursed lips and try to rotate a little further. Hold for a few seconds there and then come back. Let's repeat. So open the book, inhale, exhale a little further, and then come back. That breathing is really important there at the end, because what you'll find is when you're rotating at first, there's a certain amount you're going to be able to go. When we inhale and then exhale, we're starting to couple the rib movement with the thoracic spine rotation, and it's going to allow us to open up a little more and go even further. And for most people, generally, I recommend doing 10 of these on each side. But if there is a particular shoulder that is more problematic, maybe focusing a little bit more on that side. Here we go.
All I want half kneeling version of this exercise is very similar. Let's suppose for this situation again, I'm trying to rehabilitate my right shoulder. Maybe my overhead mobility is painful or limited there, and I think it's in part due to thoracic rotation limitations. So if it's my left shoulder, it's my right knee that's going to be kneeling, and that's the side that's going to be closest to a wall or other sturdy structure like this bike. Okay? Meaning my non-kneeling knee is going to be my left side, and that knee is going to be pushing gently, not as hard as you can by any means, kind of like with the Sidelying version, but instead of into the floor, into the wall, into this bike, whatever sturdy structure we're talking about, that's what I'm going to do. So once again, we start in the closed book position, and I'm going to rotate here, keeping some degree of pressure into the foam roller there, or whatever the object is. And once I get to my end range, I'm going to inhale, again, 40 to 50%, and then exhale and go a little further. Hold a few seconds, and then return back to the closed book position. Let's repeat that.
Now, after we do exercises like the open books that I just showed you, we always want to make sure to use the test, treat, retest model. So maybe our test initially was actually looking at thoracic rotation range of motion. Maybe it was looking at external rotation of the shoulder in 90-90 abduction. Whatever it is, we want to use a retest to determine if these types of exercises made a difference. And if they did, we might give some of these for the patient for homework, but we might also want to add some reinforcing exercises. And that's what we're going to cover right now.
Another great exercise with which you can improve thoracic rotation mobility is an opposing pull back and push through. We'll get to the details in just a minute, but essentially what that looks like is with one arm, I'm going to essentially do a row while the other hand pushes forward. And then as I eccentrically control this arm, I'm pulling the other arm back. And so kind of in real time, it looks like this. Now, this can be done in two positions, possibly more, but the two most common would be full kneeling with your buttocks on your heels, or like I am, essentially in long sitting. These are just two different methods for locking out the low back to eliminate lumbar compensation, particularly lumbar rotation. So as long as you're doing that, you're already off to a good start. Now to better understand this, let's get a concrete example. Once again, I'm rehabbing my left shoulder here, okay? So on my left side, when I row back, that's getting me a little more thoracic extension on that side. And remember, extension is more coupled with inhalation. Whereas when I let the arm go forward, at least on this side, that's getting me a little more thoracic flexion, a little more coupled with exhalation, okay? So if I want to start with the easier version, rehabbing the left side, I'm going to hold the band in my right hand. And so no matter which hand this band is in, when my left arm comes back, I'm going to inhale, and when it comes forward, I'm going to exhale through pursed lips. So in real time, so maybe I'll start here, inhale through the nose, and then exhale through pursed lips. Inhale, exhale. Making sure, trying to rotate at the spine each time. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Now, once that exercise gets a lot easier, your shoulder's doing a lot better, overhead movements, especially with resistance, are getting a lot better, it might be beneficial to switch hands and now strengthen into that left thoracic rotation. So once again, because our target is the left arm, as we bring this back, I'm still going to be inhaling, and as I let it go forward, I'm still going to be exhaling. The only thing we're changing is which band has the resistance. So I'll start here, and as I row this left arm back, I'm going to inhale through the nose, exhale, inhale, exhale. If you watched my video on improving thoracic extension mobility, one of the reinforcing exercises that we did, granted it was in a seated position to better lock the low back, it was a behind the neck overhead press. And despite what you may have been told about this exercise over the years, assuming that you've got decent mobility in the thoracic spine, decent in the shoulders, decent stability provided by the rotator cuff muscles, etc., it is by no means an unsafe exercise. In fact, it's actually really good for maintaining mobility and stability in that type of position there. Just really good for the shoulders and upper back in general. What we're gonna do is we're gonna modify this exercise to help us a little more with rotation. So what we're gonna do is, again, assuming I'm working more on my left side, I'm going to bring my foot onto a step here, okay? So when I do this, I am essentially locking out the low back to an extent to prevent it from excessively rotating towards the left. Now, I could try to block this a little further. I'm going to try to volitionally block it. The setup would just be a little bit too complicated if I had to put something over here against a wall, etc., etc. But essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in the same position, and without letting my left thigh move, I'm going to rotate in that direction, okay? I don't necessarily need to go to a full end range, just wherever it reasonably locks up the spine. And then from here, I'm gonna inhale as I press straight up, and then exhale as I come back down, and come back. And I actually like to return to the starting position each time just so I, again, can engage that rotation and inhale as I press up. Try not to hit lights if you have them. And come back down. If you want to challenge it a little more, take your grip in a little bit. So narrow the grip slightly. Rotate again. Exhale, press up. Or excuse me, inhale, press up. And then exhale, come back down. Like that, okay? So that is a behind the neck overhead press in a rotated position.
Now, at the end of the previous video on thoracic extension mobility, I mentioned that one of our end game exercises is the behind the neck overhead press. And it's really good at, once you've gotten a lot of mobility gains in the thoracic spine and also shoulder external rotation in that 90-90 abduction position, it's really good at just getting to that little last bit of mobility gains and really maintaining those long term and just reinforcing the stability of the shoulders, the mobility and the strength in those positions, just making that whole area much more resilient. And I do think that the behind the neck overhead press can certainly be a major lift that's part of your normal resistance training routine when you're doing upper body. It's a really good exercise. And I think there's actually maybe overall, for longevity's sake, more benefit of that than doing it in front of the neck overhead press. But that's just my opinion. And we can play that same game with thoracic rotation, as you see right here with the behind the neck overhead press. This is essentially the same exercise, the same movement. It was what I showed you previously with the stick, except now I'm progressing to a barbell, and I can even throw some plates on there and overload this beyond that. Again, with both exercises, I could do it in the Captain Morgan position like I showed you a minute ago. I can also do it here in the half kneeling position. And I do think that the behind the neck overhead press could be a major lift that you do for shoulders, etc., when you're doing upper body resistance training. However, every once in a while, I think it's good to throw in some variants of that, like this one. And I think it's really good for promoting longevity in your lifting and just in life in general. Again, there's many reasons that injury can occur, but one really common reason is when you're doing something in a weird, odd, awkward position, your body is not ready for it because you don't practice things in that position, and you do something and you might get injured. And in these weird, awkward positions, that's where one area where injury is more probable. Not saying it's going to happen, but it could. And I think the more that we can prepare our bodies, like in particular shoulders and upper back, for these, the more resilient we're going to be, the more longevity we're going to be able to create out of that. So again, this doesn't need to be a major lift, but if you are doing behind the neck overhead presses, every once in a while, throw some of these in there. And it's really good for getting that thoracic rotation mobility, but also having the shoulders become more resilient in that position. Fantastic exercise. If you haven't ever tried it, definitely give it a try, but make sure that you can do the regular behind the neck overhead presses without any issues first, okay? Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much.